Hi, I'm with Richard Vague, author of the book, The Next Economic Disaster. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Richard, I'm interested in why you wrote this book and what the financial crises of 2008 and 2009 mean for the policy choices the nation needs to make and what this means for American society going forward.
Well, it turns out that this financial crisis and most major financial crises relate to rapidly growing private debt. And if that's the case, that means that future crises are preventable, which is extremely important, I think, in managing our economy. Furthermore, it means that we can go in and look at the excessive private debt that's been created and find ways to repair it, which will re-energize the economy. In the U.S. in 1950, private debt to GDP was 56%. Today it's 156%. It's tripled in 2 generations. So it's not private debt per se that's the issue. It's when it grows too rapidly and then when it reaches levels that are too high.
What are 2 or 3 of the most important indicators that tell you that an economy is barreling towards a crisis? What pops up? What are the red flags that you see?
Well, the 2 that we look at the most are the growth in private debt. If in a period of 5 years you have a 20% or more growth in private debt to GDP, that's the first factor. The second is that your overall level of private debt is high. And we use roughly 150% aggregate private debt to GDP as that benchmark. Once you have a combination of those 2 things, you're highly likely to have a financial crisis.
Tell me where China is today in both of those figures.
China's figures are alarming. China's growth in private debt to GDP in the last 5 years is over 50%. The numbers are a little fuzzy. You get slightly different numbers from slightly different sources. It's at least 40%. It's probably over 50%. And aggregate private debt to GDP is at least 180%. So China is at that point where a crisis is likely, and unless they take the appropriate steps, we're going to have an issue. But the other thing that has been a neglected tool here is restructuring problem debt. Consumers today still, after all these years in the U.S., but more importantly in Europe, are carrying way too much debt. And if they are having to make payments on debt, that means they're not spending it on goods and services, and frankly, that dampens economic growth. Going in where you have underwater mortgages, problem debt, and restructuring it will free borrowers up to spend on goods and services and reinvigorate the economy.